What happens when Britain's most controversial royal goes head-to-head with television's most unapologetic host? The answer played out in front of millions when Prince Harry sat across from Sharon Osbourne in what began as a polite, almost routine interview only to spiral into one of the most explosive moments in daytime TV history. From the second Harry walked onto the View set, the tension was electric. Producers had promised a safe, controlled conversation centered on his charitable work with veterans and his mental health initiatives. But what they got was a showdown that nobody saw coming. Behind the scenes, Harry's team had delivered strict instructions. No questions about King Charles, Queen Camilla, or Prince William. No mention of the Netflix series. No reference to the tell-all memoir. Sharon, however, was never one to play by the rules. Harry entered composed, adjusting his tie with nervous precision, offering carefully measured answers that sounded rehearsed. From years of media training, for the first few minutes, the conversation flowed smoothly. He spoke warmly about service, duty, and sacrifice. But Sharon's eyes never left him. She wasn't listening, she was waiting. "It's wonderful to hear about your charity work." "Harry," Sharon began, her tone dripping with a sweetness that felt more like bait than praise. "But I have to ask, how do you reconcile this public image of caring for veterans with what many see as your abandonment of your own military family back home?" The studio fell silent. Cameras zoomed in on Harry's face. For the briefest moment, his carefully constructed calm cracked just enough for viewers to see irritation flash in his eyes. He recovered quickly, but the damage was done. Sharon had crossed the invisible line his team had tried so desperately to protect. "That's quite an unfair characterization," Harry replied, his accent sharpening with stress. "My commitment to veterans has never wavered, no matter where I live or what family circumstances surround me." Sharon's laugh cut like a knife. "Family circumstances? That's quite the euphemism for turning your back on everything you once stood for, isn't it?" She shuffled her notes like ammunition. "Let's remind everyone what those circumstances really are." The assault was relentless. She listed his decade of service, his loyalty once celebrated by soldiers who had followed him into battle, and contrasted it with his new life in California, cashing Netflix checks. As she put it, while criticizing the very institutions those same soldiers had served under. Harry's jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened on the armrests of his chair. Every instinct screamed at him to fire back. But he knew one wrong move would confirm Sharon's accusations. "My service record speaks for itself," he finally said, his voice steady but loaded with restrained fury. "I will never forget the men and women I served alongside. What I've chosen to do now is speak truth to power, something that clearly makes a lot of people uncomfortable." Sharon leaned forward, eyes glittering. "Truth to power. Is that what we're calling it now?" The stage was set. The gloves were off. And what happened next would leave the studio and the internet reeling. Asterisk calling it now. Sharon's voice dripped with sarcasm as she turned to the audience, inviting them to share in her contempt. "Let me tell you about truth. Harry, the truth is that you had everything, absolutely everything handed to you on a silver platter. And you threw it all away because you couldn't handle a little criticism from the British press." The words hit the air like a gunshot. Harry's mask of composure faltered. For the first time since the interview began, raw emotion flickered across his face. His breath quickened. A muscle in his cheek twitched. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, the careful diplomacy gone from his tone. "You don't understand what my family endured, what my wife endured, or the impossible position we were put in by an institution that protects its image before it protects its people." Sharon's eyes lit up. She had him. She'd dragged the prince off script and into dangerous territory. "Your wife," she repeated, her brows lifting in mock surprise. "Oh, you mean the woman who married into the most privileged family on earth? Only to spend the next few years complaining about how difficult her life was. The same woman who cried racism without naming a single name or incident that could be verified." The studio froze. Even the camera seemed to hesitate, zooming in tighter, catching every tremor in Harry's jaw. Every flicker in his eyes. Harry's stare hardened into something dangerous. For a beat, it looked as though he might walk off the set or explode. Sharon pressed forward, sensing blood in the water. "Let's talk about privilege," she continued, her voice now booming with the authority of someone who'd survived decades in the cutthroat entertainment world. "You were born into a life that billions of people could only dream of: private jets, palaces, round-the-clock security, the best education money could buy. And yet here you are, trying to sell the world on the idea that you're the victim." Harry's hands balled into fists against the armrests. His chest rose and fell in sharp bursts. The studio audience, usually quick to clap or gasp, sat in hushed silence, transfixed. "Victim?" His voice cracked, the strain undeniable. "You think this is about playing the victim? This is about protecting my family from the same machine that killed my mother. This is about making sure history doesn't repeat itself while people like you sit in your ivory towers, passing judgment on things you couldn't possibly comprehend." The mention of Princess Diana rippled through the studio like an earthquake. A collective shiver passed through the crowd. For a moment, even Sharon faltered. Then her expression hardened again. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice low, sharp, and more lethal than any shout. "Don't you dare drag your mother into this to excuse your betrayal. Diana may have struggled, but she never abandoned her duty. She didn't run to California to cash in on her story. She faced it. She lived it." Harry shot to his feet, his chair skidding back with a screech. The sudden movement sent security on high alert at the edges of the set. The studio gasped. "How dare you speak about my mother?" he roared, his voice shaking with fury. "You didn't know her. You don't know what she went through, what she sacrificed, or what she wanted for her children." Sharon remained seated, unflinching, her face a mask of cold calculation. She had broken him open on live television, and she wasn't finished. "I know this," she said, her voice slicing through the tension like steel. She would never have wanted her son to turn himself into a professional victim. She would never have wanted you to sell out your family for profit, and she damn sure wouldn't have wanted you to use her memory as a shield every time someone questions your choices. The words landed like blows: rage, hurt, disbelief. For one raw second, Harry looked less like a prince and more like a man on the verge of breaking. The cameras caught every flicker of his unraveling, immortalizing it in high definition for the world to dissect, and the studio, still silent, knew they were watching history. It was television gold, kind of raw, unfiltered moment, destined to be clipped, replayed, and dissected endlessly across social media and news outlets. "You're crossing a line here, Sharon." One of the other hosts finally broke in, her voice trembling as she realized the show had spiraled completely beyond control. "Maybe we should cut to a commercial?" "No." Sharon's interruption was sharp and merciless. She didn't even glance at her co-host, her eyes locked on Harry, like a predator. "I think our viewers deserve the truth for once, not the sanitized fairy tale Harry's PR team spoon-feeds them. They deserve to know what kind of man abandons his family, his country, and his duty just because things got a little difficult." Something inside Harry snapped. The media polish, the rehearsed calm, the diplomatic restraint, all dissolved in an instant. "Difficult," he erupted. He erupted, his voice breaking with fury. "You call watching my wife systematically destroyed by the British press difficult? You call being told my newborn son wouldn't have the same security as his cousins difficult. You call learning that my mixed-race children wouldn't be granted the same protections as other royal grandchildren difficult. The revelation detonated like a bomb. Gasps rippled through the studio. Even Sharon blinked, caught off guard by the rawness of his outburst. Carrie had said it on live television, with no taking it back. And Sharon, ruthless as ever, struck immediately. "So now we're playing the race card," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Predictable. When you can't defend your actions on their own merits, you fall back on accusations of racism. It's the oldest trick in the victim playbook. The words landed like a slap. Harry's eyes widened in disbelief, as if he couldn't process the sheer cruelty of the dismissal. The studio air grew so heavy, the low hum of the lights seemed deafening. "You're unbelievable," Harry whispered, his voice low but trembling with venom. "Absolutely unbelievable. You sit there, drenched in privilege, having never lived. A day under the scrutiny my family endured. And you have the audacity, the sheer audacity, to call our experiences a card." Sharon leaned back in her chair, calm, collected, and triumphant. She had dragged the prince into open battle, ripped away his protective armor, exposed the nerve. "I'm stating facts," she replied coolly, her tone maddeningly even compared to Harry's unraveling. "Fact. You had everything and you threw it away. Fact. Instead of working within the system to create change, you burned it down and cashed the ashes. Fact. Now you sit here painting yourself as a victim of circumstances millions would consider blessings." Harry stood frozen, chest heaving, his hands trembling with the effort not to explode further. The cameras never looked away, capturing every flicker of rage, every shadow of pain, every twitch of restraint. But Sharon wasn't finished. She had saved her cruelest line for last. "You know what I find most disturbing, Harry?" she said, her voice now laced with mock concern and edge that cut deeper than outright fury. "It's not just that you abandoned your duty, it's that you've weaponized your trauma. You've commodified your pain. You've turned your mother's death into a brand." The words struck him like lightning. Harry's face drained pale, then flushed scarlet with a rage so visceral that even crew members flinched. Gasps erupted across the audience, even Sharon's. Co-hosts stared at her in disbelief at the brutality of the attack. "Stop!" Harry's voice was a whisper, but it carried danger. "Just stop talking." But Sharon leaned in, merciless. She could smell the moment, the kind of legacy-making, confrontation that would echo for years. Diana's death was a tragedy that touched the world. She continued, her voice steady, her eyes burning into him. "But you've turned that tragedy into your meal ticket. Every interview, every documentary, every book, every speech. It always comes back to your mother and poor little Harry. You've built an empire on grief, and frankly, it's grotesque." The studio seemed to stop breathing. Harry's entire body trembled. Rage, grief, humiliation all colliding in a storm that the cameras captured, second by second. For history and the world knew, in that instant, that this was no longer just an interview. It was a televised detonation. Asterisk, the words landed like shrapnel, and the studio erupted into chaos. Harry's security detail closed in, reading the shift in his body language with the precision of men trained to recognize breaking points. The other hosts began speaking at once, voices overlapping, hands waving, desperate to regain control of a situation that had slipped irretrievably through their fingers. It was like trying to halt a hurricane with a paper umbrella. "You're sick," Harry said. His voice shook, but not from weakness. It was laced with something primal, something that seemed to crawl up from the depths of his soul. "You're genuinely sick, to sit there and accuse me of profiting from my mother's death. A woman who died when I was 12. A woman I never got to know as an adult. A woman who never got to meet her grandchildren. And you, his voice cracked, rage and grief colliding. You think that's entertainment? Tears streaked his face now, not of sorrow, but of fury, of the kind of tears that come when anger burns so hot the body has no other way to release it. Facts, Sharon snapped back, her tone clipped, rehearsed, unyielding. Every decision you've made since leaving the royal family has been packaged and sold with your mother's story. The Oprah interview, the Netflix deal, the memoir. All built on Diana. You've turned a tragedy into a business model. Harry's hand wiped the tears away, but when he looked back at her, his expression had changed. The rawness had hardened into something sharper, cold, steady, dangerous. You want to know about my mother? He asked, voice suddenly calm, terrifyingly so. He stepped closer, forcing the cameras to reframe. The air seemed to thicken. She spent her last years being hunted. By photographers. By tabloids. By people who cared more about their payday than her humanity. She died in a tunnel in Paris because she was being chased like prey. And now, T leaned forward just slightly, his words a whisper, but razor sharp, cutting through the silence. Now I'm sitting across from someone doing the exact same thing. You're exploiting tragedy for ratings. You're turning pain into content. You're everything that killed her and you're too blind to even see it. For the first time, Sharon faltered. Just a flicker, a shift in her eyes. The studio held its breath. The difference, Harry pressed on, his voice building momentum. Is that when I tell my story, I'm trying to change something, to prevent history from repeating. When you exploit it, you're just feeding the same machine that destroyed her. Sharon opened her mouth, but Harry cut her off with a dismissive flick of his hand. I'm done. He ripped the microphone from his lapel and tossed it onto the chair. The sound of it hitting the fabric echoed like a gunshot. I'm done. With this conversation, I'm done with this show. And I'm done with people like you who think decency is optional if it buys you ratings. He turned toward the exit, but paused. Looked back. His expression had shifted again, no longer blazing with anger, no longer raw with grief. Just tired. You know what the real tragedy is, Sharon? His voice carried across the stunned silence of the studio. You had the chance to have a meaningful conversation about veterans' mental health, about military families, about issues that actually matter, and instead you turned it into a circus. For clicks, for views, for yourself. Sharon finally found her voice. Harry, wait, no, he cut in sharply. I've waited long enough. I've spent my entire life waiting for people like you to remember that behind every headline, there's a human being, and I'm done waiting. And with that, Prince Harry walked off the set. The studio froze in stunned silence. One by one, the co-hosts followed, scrambling after him, leaving Sharon alone at the desk. The cameras kept rolling, capturing her stillness. Her sudden loss for words, the woman who always had a comeback. Speechless for the first time in her career. Yes. She had what she wanted. A viral moment. The kind of clip that would be dissected and replayed across every platform for weeks to come. But the cost hung heavy in the air. She had stripped Harry bare, yes. But in doing so, she had also revealed herself as the crew began dismantling the set. The lights dimming on the wreckage of what had been an interview. One truth remained. Sharon Osbourne had created one of the most explosive moments in television history. But she had also shown the world how far she was willing to gauge some lines. Once crossed can never be uncrossed.